At precisely 10:22 a.m. on June 4, 1942, the world's most powerful naval striking force had 5 minutes left to live. For Japanese aircraft carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, Hiryu, veterans of Pearl Harbor, masters of the Pacific for 6 glorious months, steamed confidently toward what they believed would be their greatest triumph. Their crews had no idea they were about to suffer the most catastrophic naval defeat in modern history. In exactly 300 seconds, 3 of those carriers would be transformed into floating infernos. Before the sun set, all 4 would be gone, taking with them 3,057 men in Japan's dream of empire. This is how it happened. This is Midway, as the Japanese lived it, fought it, and died in it. 2 months earlier, Tokyo. April 18, 1942. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto stands at his office window, watching American B-25 bombers, launched impossibly from an aircraft carrier, streak across the sky above the Imperial Palace. The Doolittle raid causes minimal physical damage but inflicts a psychological wound that will never heal. The homeland, sacred and supposedly invulnerable, has been violated. Someone must answer for this humiliation. That someone, Yamamoto knows, will be him if he doesn't act decisively. The 58-year-old commander-in-chief of the combined fleet had never wanted this war. During his years in America, Harvard, naval attaché in Washington, he had witnessed the industrial colossus that Japan now faced. He'd seen the steel mills of Pittsburgh running day and night, the endless farmlands that could feed unlimited armies, the shipyards capable of building a fleet every month. When Prime Minister Kono had asked him about war with America, Yamamoto had been brutally honest. I can guarantee to put up a tough fight for the first 6 months, but I have absolutely no confidence as to what would happen if it went on for 2 or 3 years. Now, exactly 6 months after Pearl Harbor, that window of opportunity was closing fast. The American carriers, Enterprise, Lexington, Hornet, Yorktown, continued to strike Japanese forces across the Pacific. They haunted Yamamoto's every waking moment. Pearl Harbor, tactically brilliant, had failed strategically. Not one American carrier destroyed. That failure could no longer be tolerated. Commander Joseph Rockefeller at Station HYPO, Pearl Harbor, had broken the Japanese Navy's JN-25B code. Every message, every plan, every ship movement, the Americans knew it all. When Japanese intelligence referred to target AF, Rockefeller orchestrated a brilliant ruse. Midway broadcast false reports via secure cable that they were short on fresh water. Days later, intercepted Japanese messages reported AF is short on water. The target was confirmed. Admiral Chester Nimitz now knew where, when, and with how many ships the Japanese would attack. He positioned his 3 carriers, Enterprise, Hornet, and the hastily repaired Yorktown, northeast of Midway at Point Luck, perfectly placed to ambush the ambushers. The Japanese submarine cordon meant to detect American ships leaving Pearl Harbor arrived on station too late. The carriers had already passed through. Operation K, a planned reconnaissance flight over Pearl Harbor, was cancelled when American ships were found occupying the intended refueling point at French frigate shoals. One by one, the eyes that might have warned of the American trap were being systematically blinded. Radio intelligence indicated increased American submarine activity around Midway. The ease with which Americans had found Japanese forces at Coral Sea suggested compromised communications. But these warnings were dismissed with fatal arrogance. The Americans are too stupid to break our codes and too cowardly to fight unless they have overwhelming superiority. May 27, 1942. Anniversary of Admiral Togo's great victory over Russia at Tsushima 37 years earlier. Vice Admiral Chuchi Nagumo's carrier strike force, Kido Butai, departs the inland sea. 4 carriers, 2 battleships, 3 cruisers, 11 destroyers. Between the carriers, 248 aircraft and the most experienced naval aviators in the world. These ships and men had devastated Pearl Harbor, rampaged from Hawaii to Ceylon, sunk British carriers in the Indian Ocean. Surely nothing could stop them. Yet Nagumo himself, standing on Akaji's bridge as the fleet steamed into the Pacific, harbored deep doubts. A torpedo specialist by training, uncomfortable with aviation, appointed to command by seniority rather than expertise, Nagumo had never felt at ease with this responsibility. At Pearl Harbor, his caution had prevented the third strike that might have destroyed American repair facilities and fuel depots. Now he was being asked to execute an operation even more complex, with forces that had been at sea almost continuously for 6 months, with crews that desperately needed rest. Most troubling, the recent Battle of Coral Sea had cost Japan dearly. Carrier Shokaku badly damaged, requiring months of repairs. Her sister Zuikaku lost so many aircraft and pilots she couldn't participate at Midway. 2 of Japan's finest carriers would be absent from the decisive battle. As Nagumo confided to his chief of staff, Captain Ryanosuke Kusaka, "We are being asked to do too much with too little. Our pilots are tired, our ships need maintenance, and we don't even know where their carriers are." June 4, 1942. 0430 hours. Pre-dawn darkness blankets the Pacific. Aboard Akaji, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, flight deck crews prepare the first strike against Midway. 36 Val dive bombers, 36 Kate-level bombers, 36 Zero fighters, 108 aircraft total. Lieutenant Joichi Tomonaga will lead them. As the pilots man their aircraft, many write final letters to families, to be delivered if they don't return. Petty Officer Tanaka jokes with his friends Yamada and Suzuki, both 18 years old. "I'll sink a battleship," Yamada boasts. "I'll shoot down 5 American planes," Suzuki counters. They laugh, confident, immortal in their youth. Neither will live to see sunset. At precisely 0430, Akaji turns into the wind. One by one, the strike aircraft launch into the lightning sky, circle once over the fleet, then head southeast toward Midway, 240 miles distant. Nagumo makes his first critical decision: hold back 108 aircraft as reserve, armed with torpedoes and armor-piercing bombs in case American ships appear. It seems prudent. Doctrine demands maintaining readiness for surface engagement. But it will prove catastrophic. At 0500, Nagumo launches reconnaissance aircraft to search for American forces. 7 aircraft to cover a vast ocean. By contrast, Americans have over 30 PBYs searching. Most critically, the search plane from Heavy Cruiser Tone, designated Scout No. 4, assigned to search the sector where American carriers actually are, launches 30 minutes late. Catapult problems, the report says. This single mechanical failure will cascade into catastrophe. This transmission reaches Nagumo just as the first American strikes from Midway begin arriving. First come 6 TBF Avengers and 4 B-26 Marauders carrying torpedoes. Zeros swarm them. 5 Avengers explode in flames, 2 B-26s are destroyed. But one B-26, piloted by Lieutenant James Murray, drops its torpedo, then makes a desperate strafing run directly at Akaji. According to multiple witnesses on the bridge, the bomber roared down the length of the flight deck at mast height, machine guns blazing, killing 2 sailors. It pulled up at the last instant, barely clearing the bridge where Nagumo and his staff dove for cover. Murray's aircraft sustained over 500 bullet holes but somehow made it back to Midway. This near miss has a profound psychological effect. As Captain Kusaka later testified, to have an enemy plane nearly crash into the bridge, it was as if the war gods had given us a warning we didn't understand. More American attacks follow in rapid succession. 16 Marine dive bombers led by Major Lofton Henderson, who will be killed leading his squadron. 15 B-17s bombing from high altitude. 11 Marine Vindicators. All are repulsed with heavy losses. Not one bomb hits. But the constant attacks keep Japanese carriers dodging and weaving, unable to conduct efficient flight operations. At 0715, Nagumo faces his first fateful decision. His reserve aircraft are armed for anti-ship attack. But Tomonaga needs support at Midway, and no enemy carriers have been spotted. After heated discussion with his staff, Nagumo issues the order: remove torpedoes and armor-piercing bombs. Rearm with land attack ordnance. Down in the hangar decks of all 4 carriers, organized chaos erupts. Ordnance crews begin the laborious process of removing Type 91 torpedoes and 800 kg armor-piercing bombs, replacing them with smaller land attack munitions. Against all safety regulations, against standard protocols, the removed torpedoes and bombs are stacked in the hangar spaces rather than returned to the magazines deep below. There isn't time. Aircraft are refueled, fuel lines snake everywhere. The hangar decks become powder kegs waiting for a spark. Then, at 0728, everything changes. Tone's delayed scout number 4 finally reports, sight what appears to be 10 enemy surface ships, bearing 010 degrees, distance 240 miles. Nagumo immediately signals, ascertain ship types. The response doesn't come. Agonizing minutes pass. The rearming continues. More American strikes arrive, 16 Marine dive bombers, massacred by Zeros. 8 shot down, but the attacks keep coming, forcing violent evasive maneuvers that prevent flight operations. At 0809, Tone Scout finally clarifies, enemy ships are 5 cruisers and 5 destroyers. Nagumo breathes easier. No carriers. He continues preparing for the second Midway strike. But at 0820, another message shatters that relief: the enemy is accompanied by what appears to be a carrier. Rear Admiral Taman Yamaguchi, commanding carriers Hiryu and Soryu from Hiryu, immediately signals Nagumo, consider it advisable to launch attack force immediately. Yamaguchi, aggressive and decisive, sees the danger clearly. Every minute of delay increases vulnerability. But Nagumo hesitates. His aircraft are in chaos, some armed with torpedoes, some with bombs, many not armed at all. His fighters are running low on fuel and ammunition from hours of combat air patrol. Tomonaga's returning strike is approaching, also low on fuel. To launch now would mean a piecemeal, uncoordinated attack with no fighter escort. Commander Genda, despite his illness, is consulted. According to staff officer testimonies, he argues for immediate launch. Speed is everything now. Launch what we have. But Captain Kusaka counsels caution: if we attack piecemeal, we'll suffer heavy losses for little gain. Better to recover our aircraft, rearm properly, then launch a fully constituted strike. Nagumo, always cautious, always by the book, sides with Kusaka. He signals all carriers: after completing recovery of aircraft, we shall proceed north to engage the enemy. This decision, logical, prudent, completely wrong, seals the fate of the Kido Butai. As Tomonaga's planes begin landing at 0837, the hangar decks become death traps. Fuel lines everywhere. Torpedoes and bombs scattered about. Elevators cycling constantly, bringing aircraft up and down. Safety abandoned in the rush to prepare for launch. Then, at 0920, the first American carrier aircraft arrive. 15 TBD Devastator torpedo bombers from Hornets Torpedo Squadron 8, led by Lieutenant Commander John Waldron. Without fighter escort, flying obsolete aircraft at barely 100 knots, they bore in against the entire Japanese fleet. The Zeros on combat air patrol finally have worthy targets. They descend like wolves. The massacre is absolute. One by one, Waldron's Devastators are shot down. Flaming aircraft cartwheel into the sea. Pilots trapped in cockpits. Gunners still firing as their planes disintegrate around them. All 15 are destroyed. Of 30 aircrews, only one survives, Ensign George Gay, who will hide under his seat cushion, floating in the water, watching the rest of the battle unfold. Not a single torpedo hits. But Waldron's sacrifice is not in vain. The Zeros are all at sea level now, focused entirely on the torpedo bombers. At 0954, 14 more Devastators arrive from Enterprise's Torpedo Squadron 6, led by Lieutenant Commander Eugene Lindsay. Again, the Zeros swarm down. 10 shot down, for escape. No hits. At 1012, 12 Devastators from Yorktown's Torpedo Squadron 3 attack, led by Lieutenant Commander Lance Massey. 10 more shot down. Still no torpedo hits. Of 41 torpedo bombers that attacked, only 6 survive. It seems like meaningless slaughter. On Akaji's bridge, relief washes over the command staff. The American attacks have been repulsed with terrible losses. Nagumo orders the strike force to prepare for launch at 10:30. Victory seems certain. But high above, unnoticed, with every Zero at sea level chasing torpedo planes, 2 groups of SBD Dauntless dive bombers arrive simultaneously at 14,000 feet. Lieutenant Commander Wade McCluskey, leading 33 dive bombers from Enterprise, had searched beyond his calculated interception point, gambling his remaining fuel to find the Japanese fleet. He had spotted destroyer Arracourt racing north, she'd been depth-charging submarine USS Nautilus, and followed her wake directly to the Kido Butai. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Commander Max Leslie's 17 dive bombers from Yorktown approached from a different direction. Through pure chance and brilliant individual initiative, both groups arrived at the same perfect moment. The Japanese carriers were at maximum vulnerability. Decks packed with fueled, armed aircraft waiting to launch. Hangar spaces crammed with bombs and torpedoes. All fighters at sea level. No one on the Japanese ships saw them coming. At 10:20, lookouts on Akaji scream, "Helldivers!" But it's too late. At 10:22, McCluskey pushes over into his dive from 14,500 feet. Behind him, his squadrons roll into their attack dives, one after another, a cascade of death plunging from the sky. The rising sun insignias on carrier decks grow larger in their bomb sights, perfect targets in the crystalline morning. McCluskey's bombers target Kaga. Lieutenant Richard Best splits off with his division against Akaji. Simultaneously, Leslie's Yorktown bombers plunge toward Soryu. The sky fills with black anti-aircraft bursts, too little, too late. On Kaga, 4 bombs strike in rapid succession. The first, a 1,000-pounder, explodes near the bridge, killing Captain Jisaku Okada and most of his staff instantly. The second penetrates the flight deck amidships, detonating in the hangar among fueled aircraft. The chain reaction is catastrophic, planes exploding, aviation fuel creating walls of flame, ordnance cooking off. The third and fourth bombs complete the destruction. Within 2 minutes, Kaga is a floating torch, ammunition detonating like fireworks, men leaping into the sea to escape flames that reach 1,000 degrees Celsius. Petty Officer Tanaka, who joked with friends that morning, watches Yamada and Suzuki consumed by flames in the hangar. He can do nothing. Their screams will haunt him forever. Akaji takes just 1 direct hit, but it's enough. Lieutenant Best's 1,000-pound bomb penetrates the flight deck and explodes in the upper hangar among 18 aircraft being refueled. The improperly stored ordnance detonates in sympathetic explosions. Torpedoes explode, bombs detonate, fuel tanks rupture. Within minutes, the entire hangar deck is an inferno. Bridge personnel report temperatures exceeding 1,000 degrees. Fire control parties are driven back by the heat. The ship's communication systems fail. Nagumo and his staff, choking on smoke, are forced to transfer to a destroyer. At 10:58, even as the 3 carriers burn out of control, Admiral Yamaguchi launches Hiryu's counterstrike. 18 Val dive bombers and 6 Zero escorts, led by Lieutenant Michio Kobayashi. They follow the American plane's return track and find Yorktown at noon. Despite fierce resistance from Wildcat fighters and intense anti-aircraft fire, they score 3 bomb hits. Yorktown goes dead in the water, burning and listing. But American damage control teams work miracles. Within 2 hours, incredibly, Yorktown is underway again, making 19 knots. Yamaguchi, aggressive to the very end, immediately prepares a second strike. At 13:31, only 10 Kate torpedo bombers and 6 Zeros are available, led by Lieutenant Tomonaga. During the morning's Midway strike, Tomonaga's left-wing fuel tank had been punctured. Maintenance crews only had time to fuel his right tank, insufficient for a round trip. When offered the chance to switch planes, Tomonaga refused. Every aircraft is needed. He knows it's a one-way mission. He accepts this calmly, writes no farewell letter, makes no dramatic speeches. Duty demands it. He will fly. At 14:30, Tomonaga's small force finds Yorktown steaming at 19 knots after her damage control miracles. American fighters tear into the formation. 5 Kates are shot down on approach. Tomonaga's aircraft catches fire from fighter attacks. According to American witnesses watching from Yorktown's deck, his burning plane maintained its torpedo run, held steady despite flames engulfing the cockpit, released its torpedo at optimal range, then crashed into the sea. 2 torpedoes strike Yorktown at 14:45, tearing open her port side, causing a 26-degree list. This time the damage is fatal. She will be abandoned later that afternoon. But at 1700, 24 dive bombers from Enterprise find Hiryu. The last surviving Japanese carrier, still steaming at 30 knots, still fighting, launches her remaining fighters to intercept. It's not enough. 1,000-pound bombs strike Hiryu in rapid succession, turning her into the same kind of inferno that consumed her sisters. At 1703, Admiral Yamaguchi assembles Hiryu's crew on the tilting flight deck. According to survivors, he apologizes for the defeat, urges them to survive and rebuild a stronger navy, then retires to his bridge with Captain Tomio Kaku. Both choose to go down with their ship. Yamaguchi's final message to Nagumo includes an apology for the defeat and hope for the emperor's fortune in war. He is posthumously promoted to vice admiral. His body, like Kaku's, like Captain Yanagimoto's on Soryu, like Captain Okada's on Kaga, will never be recovered. Through the night of June 4th to 5th, the surviving Japanese ships attempt damage control, but it's hopeless. The fires burn with such intensity that seawater pumped onto them simply boils away. Soryu sinks first, at 1913 on June 4th, taking 711 men with her. Sailors on nearby destroyers watch her bow rise into the air, watch her slide beneath the waves, watch the oil-slicked water bubble and froth as she descends into darkness. Kaga follows at 1925, taking 811 sailors to the bottom. Her massive hull rolls over completely before she goes down, spilling men and debris into the Pacific. The ocean closes over her as if she had never existed. At 0200 on June 5th, Admiral Yamamoto, still 600 miles away aboard his flagship Yamato with the battleship force that never engaged, finally accepts reality. He signals, occupation of Midway is cancelled. Withdraw. The transmission is terse, emotionless. It signals the end of Japan's expansion, the beginning of a defensive war that can only end in defeat. Yamamoto goes to his cabin and locks the door. He won't emerge for 3 days. Akagi proves surprisingly hard to kill. Despite raging fires, despite catastrophic damage, she remains afloat through the night of June 4th. Her crew has abandoned her, but she refuses to die. At 0500 on June 5th, after all survivors are evacuated, Japanese destroyers fire 4 torpedoes into her. She finally sinks at 0555, taking 267 men with her, many trapped below decks since the initial hit. Hiryu also refuses to die easily. Burning through the night, listing heavily, she's finally scuttled at 0510 on June 5th, taking 392 sailors and both her admirals into the deep. As the sun rises on June 5, 1942, the cream of the Imperial Japanese Navy's carrier force lies on the Pacific floor in water over 17,000 feet deep. With them are 3,057 men. Of these, 2,181 died on the carriers, Akagi 267, Kaga 811, Hiryu 392, Soryu 711. Another 792 died when heavy cruiser Mikuma was sunk and Mogami damaged after they collided during night operations and were caught by American aircraft the next day. The survivors, picked up by destroyers, are immediately segregated from the rest of the fleet. They're confined below decks, forbidden to communicate with anyone, treated as bearers of shameful knowledge that must not spread. The journey home is one of shame and silence. Wounded sailors from the carriers are kept isolated in special compartments. No one is allowed to speak of what happened. When the fleet returns to Japan at Hashirajima Naval Base on June 14, they anchor at night to avoid observation. The wounded are offloaded in darkness, classified as secret patients, taken to isolated naval hospitals where they're kept under virtual arrest, quarantined even from their own families. They're forbidden any contact with the outside world. According to U.S. Naval Institute sources, they were treated appallingly as disgraced losers. The survivors of the air groups are immediately reassigned to distant bases in the South Pacific without being allowed to see families or friends. Most will die in subsequent battles in the Solomon Islands campaign. The carrier crews are dispersed to different ships and bases, sworn to secrecy under threat of severe punishment. The systematic cover-up begins immediately. The government prepares its propaganda. The sunken carriers Akagi and Hiryu remain on the official roster as operational, unmanned to maintain the fiction they still exist. No flag officers are court-martialed or even officially reprimanded. This would require admitting defeat. Information about the battle is withheld from the Imperial Japanese Army for a full month. Even Prime Minister Hideki Tojo is kept in the dark about the full extent of the disaster. On June 5, while ships still burned, Tokyo Radio announced to the Japanese people, naval and air forces of the empire have succeeded in inflicting heavy damage on American fleet and air forces in the Central Pacific. Later broadcasts added that Japan had achieved another smashing victory with 2 American carriers sunk. As an aside, mentioned almost in passing, the loss of 1 carrier, Kaga, was acknowledged. Soryu's loss would be admitted later. Akagi and Hiryu's destruction would not be publicly acknowledged until after the war. The Japanese people celebrated in the streets, waving flags, shouting banzai, completely unaware they were cheering a catastrophe. Mothers whose sons lay dead at the bottom of the Pacific hung victory banners in their windows, proud of sacrifices that had achieved nothing. It wasn't until June 10 that the Tokyo press first hinted at problems, using vague language about difficulties in the operation, but still maintaining the fiction of overall victory. The truth would not emerge for years. Commander Fukuda, recovering in the hospital from his appendectomy and burns received during Akagi's destruction, is visited by a naval intelligence officer who warns him, "You are forbidden to speak of what happened. As far as the world knows, we won a great victory." Admiral Yamamoto returns to his cabin aboard Yamato and doesn't emerge for 3 days. His staff hears him pacing at night, tortured by his failure. When he finally meets with his senior officers, he is brutally frank, "I gambled and lost. In trying to destroy the American carriers, I have lost our own. The war is not lost yet, but I fear I have lost the means to win it." His prediction to Prime Minister Kono had proven prophetic. Japan had indeed run wild for 6 months. Now, at Midway, occurring precisely 6 months after Pearl Harbor, the tide had turned. In a letter to his close friend that survived the war, Yamamoto wrote, "The defeat at Midway was not a matter of bad luck or enemy superiority in numbers. It was the result of our own overconfidence and poor planning. We underestimated American capabilities and overestimated our own. Now we will pay the price for our hubris." He gave Japan perhaps 18 months before the situation became completely hopeless. His prediction would prove optimistic. The true cost of Midway extends far beyond 4 carriers and 3,057 dead. Japan lost over 100 of its best pilots, men with years of training and combat experience. The pilot training program takes 2 years minimum to produce a combat-ready aviator, far longer to create an expert. More critically, the 700-plus skilled mechanics, armorers, flight deck crew who died represent institutional knowledge that took decades to develop. As Admiral Ugaki writes in his diary, "We can build new carriers in 2 years. We cannot build new pilots with the experience of those we lost." And we will never replace the skilled maintenance crews who knew how to keep our aircraft flying under combat conditions. Japanese naval aviation never recovered. At the Battle of the Philippine Sea 2 years later, inexperienced Japanese pilots would be massacred in what Americans called the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. Over 600 Japanese aircraft shot down while inflicting minimal damage. The seeds of that disaster were planted in the waters off Midway. Midway marked the end of Japanese expansion. The planned invasions of Fiji, Samoa, Hawaii were quietly cancelled. Operation FS to cut supply lines between America and Australia was abandoned. Instead, Japan was forced into a defensive war it could not win. The psychological impact was equally devastating. The Navy's aura of invincibility, cultivated since the victory over Russia at Tsushima in 1905, was shattered. As one destroyer captain recalled, after Midway, we never felt confident again. We went into battle expecting to lose. The Americans went in expecting to win. The whole psychology of the war had changed in those 5 minutes. Admiral Nagumo became the scapegoat. Despite following orthodox doctrine, despite making decisions that seemed reasonable with available information, he was blamed for the disaster. Relegated to shore duty, he never commanded carriers again. In 1944, during the American invasion of Saipan where he commanded ground forces, he committed suicide rather than face capture. Admiral Yamaguchi was honored posthumously for his fighting spirit, but his aggressive tactics couldn't overcome the strategic disaster. Lieutenant Tomonaga's self-sacrifice became legendary, but it achieved nothing beyond helping to doom Yorktown, which would have been lost anyway to submarine attack days later. Their courage, their skill, their willingness to die for their mission, all were rendered meaningless by systemic failures at every level. The disaster exposed fundamental flaws in Japanese military culture. Inflexibility of thinking. Inability to adapt to unexpected situations. Blind adherence to doctrine even when circumstances changed. Underestimation of enemies. Overestimation of spiritual strength versus material power. These cultural traits were recognized but could not be changed. The same rigid thinking would be repeated throughout the war. The greatest irony of Midway is that it achieved Yamamoto's goal, just in reverse. It was indeed the decisive battle he had sought, but it was Japan, not America, that was decisively defeated. The carriers he tried to trap had instead trapped him. The ambush he planned became the ambush he suffered. The war would continue for 3 more years, but its outcome was effectively decided in those 5 minutes on June 4, 1942. Beyond strategic implications, Midway was fundamentally a human tragedy. In waters 325 miles northwest of Midway, 3,057 Japanese sailors and airmen died, young men who had written final letters that morning, shared rice and tea for breakfast, dreamed of victory and home. They died in flames that reached 1,000 degrees, drowned in oil-slicked waters, were torn apart by explosions heard miles away. Lieutenant Hashimoto, one of few survivors from Akagi's engine room, testified, "The screams of burning men echo in my nightmares still. We couldn't save them. Passages blocked by fire. Ladders melted from heat. We could only listen as they died, calling for their mothers, for water, for death to end their agony. Every night I hear them still." The families back home never learned the truth during the war. They received notices their sons died gloriously in a great victory. Mothers hung gold stars in windows, proud of sacrifices, never knowing it was for a defeat that sealed Japan's fate. Truth would only emerge after the war, adding betrayal to grief. Today, the 4 Japanese carriers rest in over 17,000 feet of water. Their exact locations were only recently discovered by deep-sea expeditions. They are war graves, monuments to the price of hubris and the cost of war. The aircraft that once launched from their decks lie crumpled in their hangar bays. The bones of their crews remain at their battle stations, eternal guardians of ships that will never sail again. From the Japanese perspective, Midway represents the moment when dreams of empire collided catastrophically with reality. It proved that spiritual strength alone cannot overcome material weakness, that courage without intelligence leads to disaster, that rigid thinking cannot adapt to fluid situations. It was Japan's appointment with destiny, and destiny proved merciless. Yet from the ashes of defeat came a different Japan, one that renounced war, embraced democracy, became a force for peace and prosperity. The samurai spirit that once drove conquest now drives innovation. The nation that sought to dominate the Pacific now helps maintain its peace. In that transformation, perhaps the 3,057 who died at Midway did not die entirely in vain. The lesson of Midway is ultimately that no nation, no matter how powerful, can afford to underestimate its enemies, overestimate its capabilities, or ignore changing realities. The same carriers that seemed invincible at Pearl Harbor proved fatally vulnerable at Midway. The same strategies that worked against divided enemies failed against a united, informed opponent. In the end, the waves that closed over Japanese carriers were the same waves that would eventually wash away the militarism that sent them there. Their sacrifice, though tactically meaningless and strategically disastrous, helped demonstrate the futility of military aggression. This is Midway from the Japanese perspective, a story of pride before the fall, of human error compounding into catastrophe, of young lives sacrificed for strategic miscalculation. It deserves to be told not to celebrate defeat or victory, but to remember the cost of war and the price of empire. The ghosts of Midway, Japanese and American alike, remind us that war is not glorious but terrible, not triumphant but tragic, and that peace, however difficult to maintain, is always preferable to even the most decisive victory.